the thunderstorm was? Thor, exactly right. That was Thor hurling his thunderbolt. Aboriginal people, they have these rock paintings out in the desert of what they call lightning man. They have everything in nature is actually produced by the ancestors, and they call them, even like animals, came from an ancestor who was half animal, half man. They talk about kangaroo man, who lived in dreaming. And they even talk about lightning man. So if lightning comes, it's an ancestor called lightning man, and he throws down his thunderbolts. Now this is the original, this is the thinking that still comes out of this. Now the Greeks start to change. Because the early Greek philosophers, now they start to say, well, I notice when the thunderstorm comes that it's very hot and then it gets very cold. And then there's moisture in the air. And they start to say, maybe the thunderstorm is caused by the heat and the cold and the moisture. In other words, the elements of the world. And they start to say, maybe it's the God's there, but maybe it's not the God in the thunderstorm. It's the elements of the world. It's nature which is acting in this way. And so they start to separate out from the gods. They start to become human. They're starting to separate in their thinking. Their thinking is separating out of the natural world. And this is the first. Now it happens a little bit in other cultures as well, but the Greeks built it into a huge degree. And they're the ones who really invent theatre of the form that we now know. And the person who really represents all of this is the great Greek philosopher Aristotle. Now it's a long story, but the Greek are the ones who really take philosophy from being around religion and around the gods and start to look at philosophy as a human construct. They're starting to think now as an individual self. How do I think about the world? And Aristotle is he's regarded as the first scientist. And this is the beginnings of the thread that leads to the world we all live in today. He's the first one. And he's an extraordinary individual. He put all of this together. He did all these studies. He picked up, and there was a huge philosophical tradition that came before. There was Socrates, there was Plato, the whole story, massive libraries of it, and he puts it all together in a system of thinking in terms of logic. He's the first one who makes a systematic study of how we reason things out. So if you think of those 3 steps that we talked about, that every one of us has gone through, play, imagining, reason, in history, Aristotle is the one who works out the rules for reason. He works out how logic works, which is the basis of all our modern world. And he's the first one. And and he teaches it, and he builds it up, and it becomes a whole system. So it's the human step. It's on a large collective version, it's that human step in history. Now, not only that, as well as the philosophy, as well as all the art, the Greeks did something quite unique. Prior to this, all the great kingdoms were ruled over by kings and emperors. The great man, it was always a male, sometimes female, but mostly male, ruled over by a great man, and then everyone was in layers underneath that, in what we call a feudal system. You have the king, who's the boss, then you have all the others down below. Now, and what's interesting though is Aborigines, Australian Aborigines don't have that. They're all very kind of collective, but it's ruled by the dreaming. And when you step out of that into civilizations, you get an emperor or a king. Now, the Greeks are the first who seriously start to work out, do we need a king? Because they had kings, and like some kings do, they did some bad stuff. And the kings died out. So the Greeks really said in Athens, they said, well, do we really need these kings telling us what to do? They're the first ones who start to develop people managing themselves without a king. And it all happens around this very special place in Athens. This is where it begins, in Athens. This is the temple to the goddess Athene. It's up here, and down below they had what's called the Agora, which is where the people came together, and there they developed the first time with something like people running themselves. And they developed a word for it called demos kriton, which means the people speak. And it was that everyone was represented in this gathering, and every free man, unfortunately it was still the old style, it was men, but every free man would come together and they would vote for a small group who would then run Athens for the next year. So everyone got the chance to speak. They weren't run by kings. So this is the first time we get a sense of people running themselves. And the word demos kriton, get a sense of what that has become for us? You probably guess, that's right. Yeah. That's right. This is where it starts. It starts in Greece. That's why the Greeks are so important. They both lay down our way of thinking, reason and logic, but they also are the first ones who come up with a way of working together where we can manage ourselves. Again, this is the modern consciousness. This is now across the world. Everyone wants to have. Now this turning point is represented in a famous picture, which you've probably all seen. A very famous painting, which was actually painted in the Renaissance. Famous painting called The School of Athens by Raphael, the great Renaissance painter. And this is his famous painting, and this was a school of where Plato and Socrates and then Aristotle taught. And this is the famous dialogue between these two central figures, one of Plato and one of Aristotle. Now the old Greek philosophy of Aristotle and Plato was still, they were laying the foundations of modern thought, but it was still based on the older idea that we all, in a sense, lived out the work of the gods. And so when they're talking together, when they would try and find an answer to a question, Plato and the others, they would say, well, what would the gods say? So point up there. But Aristotle, who's the other one, he would say, let's work it out down here. So it's this famous act, up here or down here. And this is this moment, and this is why it's such a turning point in the story of humanity, the story of thinking. This is the first thinking that is thinking of a separated humanity. We've separated out. And as you can see just here, that's the actual bit between them. So that's very important. Now, of course, everything after that changes. And as you also know the story, then comes along after that, Aristotle leaves Athens. He goes off and he's taken up to Macedonia in the north, where he becomes the teacher of a young prince called Alexander. And he teaches Alexander, and passes on his great wisdom. And of course Alexander then goes and conquers the whole of the Middle East and makes a new empire right across the Middle East. And he goes all the way from Greece right over, even comes as far as India. Even has battles with Rajas on the edge of India. Remarkable story. But what he does is he spreads all this learning that the Greeks had developed, all the learning from Aristotle, and he spreads it right across the Middle East. And all the books and all the manuscripts get taken right across the Middle East. And this builds up the first kind of cosmopolitan empire. But it doesn't last that long. It falls apart. Alexander dies, and then it falls apart. But all that Greek wisdom had gone over into the Arab world, into the Middle East. And they have taken that and they translated a lot of those old Greek texts into Arabic. So they're there, being looked after by the Arabs. Now Greece after that goes into a decline, and of course a new empire emerges, which lifts it all up into another high level. And this of course is the next empire, which is the Roman Empire. So the Romans then become the biggest empire the world had ever known. And they lift up all this new thinking, this separated Greek thinking, they lift it up to another very earthy level. They put it into stone, rocks and stones. Of course, we're now moving into the Class 6 curriculum. We following this journey. And they, of course, and they're fantastic builders, incredible technology that they're able to start to do. Structures which are still standing 2,000 years later. Colosseum, and these amazing places in Rome. And of course, the Romans as well have this great commitment to not being ruled by a king. And they developed the concept, the idea of a republic. They call it the republic, where you're not ruled by kings, but you're ruled by your own people. Now the Romans had they were less equal in a sense, because they had the aristocrats, the patricians, and they had the common people, the tribunes, the kind of plebeians. So they had like two levels in their society. But they had this huge commitment to not being ruled by kings, not one person ruling them. And they wanted to make sure that they really kept their republic alive. And of course, then emerged someone who was so good at ruling everyone, a fantastic general, that people thought he might become the king. Of course, this is Julius Caesar. And you know the story of how Julius Caesar he's so good, he's such a great general, and he's so charismatic. There is this battle within the ruling group of Rome. They're worried that he will make himself a king and the people will want him to be a king. And of course this would destroy the republic. So of course what happens? He gets assassinated. So he's actually murdered in the forum. All done to save the republic. But of course it backfires, because after he is killed, his grandnephew steps up, and he in fact becomes the emperor. And this is Augustus. And so this heralds in the whole of the new stage of the Roman Empire, which now lasts for about 500 years. And they're really the most powerful empire on earth, the Roman Empire. Now I can see we're at now 9:54 according to my clock. Is that correct? Yes. Yeah, so we've got, look, what I want to do is stop now. Now I've got tomorrow, so I'll do the second half will be tomorrow. I thought, are there any questions so far? And then the second part of the journey will be bringing us right up to today, up to date. Yeah? So we're leaving it at Augustus, because this is quite a significant turning point, and then we'll carry on. So any questions? Any questions? You must have a question.
Still in the story mode. Still in the story mode.
You're in a story mood? Oh, fair enough. Well, we've got just 5 minutes, but yeah, question, Athena.
So in the journey to modern thinking, in terms of the place that is kind of different from different cultures, right?
Yeah.
Does it, okay, I don't know how to frame this question yet, but does it produce a result where there are certain cultures that are more modern and there are certain cultures that are not, and kind of represent whether they are more advanced in the journey or not?
Well, that's the the issue is how you frame that, how you say that. We're all at different stages, in a way. And that's one of the big ones I wanted to talk about tomorrow. I'm trying to just, in a sense, track the story, because this puts our main lesson curriculum into a perspective. It's telling a story, what I call the global story. And with everything like this, you know, I never like to use the word advanced, in a sense, because that has a judgment involved. And it's like people in life, everyone has something to offer. Everyone has something important. So I don't like to use that as you know, a single kind of way of making a judgment. It's like in a classroom, there are some children who are very smart and able to do their academic work, and have a child who's not, but that other child will be able to do certain things that the academic child can't do. And so you really value what each child can do, and see that in the totality, you know, the wholeness of human life. There are many, many qualities, and it's just that sometimes we value one quality over another one, but really each quality is important in its own right. So that's why I don't like to talk about more advanced or less advanced. Just trying to tell the story of what is it, how did we get to this modern, the contemporary world that everyone is part of. See, I don't want to jump to what I want to talk about tomorrow. So maybe if we could just hang fire on that one and then come back to it tomorrow. Is that okay?
Yeah, of course.
Sure. Yeah. Andrew, question? Oh, yeah, your question.
Because you were mentioning a few times about the turning point. Is that the one that we are connecting to the local story, that where we get the turning point of the whole to meet the turning point of what we are going to tell them to deliver to our students?
Quite sure.
You were mentioning a few times about the consciousness and the turning point. What happened during the turning point, and when we are looking for the local story, are we looking at this turning point as well?
Oh, I see. No, not necessarily. No, more you tell your local story as it is, and this is. I mean, if I talk about the turning point, that was the Greeks are a turning point in the world story. Oh, I see. And whether there's a turning point in the local one. If there is one, yes, that's significant. But life is a series of turning points. Like there's always steps on the way. Just the Greeks are a particularly important one because they start something that then leads to where we are today. So you just tell whatever is important in your local story. And if you find those, tell those turning points. Andrew?
How about Socrates?
Sorry?
Socrates.
Yeah, I didn't have time to mention him. Socrates he's the, I should have mentioned him, they call him the kind of the midwife of Aristotle's thoughts. So Socrates, I didn't have time to mention him, but yeah, he's the first one who starts to think for himself. And then Aristotle turns it into a whole system. So that's why Aristotle is but they each, Socrates and Plato and Aristotle, I don't want this deck to be too long. But they're absolutely crucial because he's the one who starts to ask questions. And in fact, he gets put to death because people think he's questioning the gods. So you're right, he's absolutely crucial in that story. Yeah. Yeah.
The Aborigines and the Orang-Ulu, if they're still in a way of life that's connected with the world around them, have they evolved in their consciousness, or do they still have a connection with the dream state, the higher?
Oh yes, sure. That's a good question that I can't answer. I'm sure some do, but my observation is, well, certainly with the Orang-Ulu, they did. But that's over time. Whatever they're doing, they are being brought into the modern way of thinking. So one of the big questions is, can they carry on that older way and do the modern way or not? That's the big question. When I was there so many years ago, I thought that as they became connected with modern things, like modern hospitals and medicine, the old style would fall away, but it hasn't. It's still there, which is interesting. So it says you can sometimes do both. So that's the interesting story. Yeah.
Do you think that it's your subconscious that you remain in the dream, but you have the subconscious, which is the reasoning?
Yes, that's right. You can.
It stays with you actually all the way, but there's probably more reasoning as you age.
Yes.
But you do go back
to the original. Yeah. That's true. That's right. It's a bit like keeping the child alive within ourselves. You know? So yeah, that's right. Very possible. Right, everyone, that's right, 10:01, so we've done our 10. So we'll pick up the story part 2 tomorrow. So come back for the next exciting episode. All right, see you tomorrow. Thank you.